Hello and welcome back, and that's right, it's time for one of the big ones. Today we want to talk about Synology versus UGREEN. Which NAS should you buy? Now, you may have been following this channel for the last few months. Hell, you may be one of the people that saw this bad boy here over on Kickstarter during its large crowdfunding campaign. And a lot of you were wondering why exactly I was not comparing UGREEN against Synology, QNAP, TerraMaster, Acer Store, and all of that guff. And as I told multiple people in the comments, the main reason is it wasn't a fair comparison. We were comparing something going through crowdfunding versus something that was available at traditional retail, which is just simply not the same thing. However, things have changed, haven't they? This has completed crowdfunding and people are receiving their units now. I think people have been getting them for the last week and a half at the time of recording, and UGREEN has confirmed that this will be going to traditional retail very soon. So all the rules are off, the gloves are off, let's crack on. And in this video, we're going to go through price and value, we're going to go through hardware, ports and connections, we're going to go through the software, we're going to talk about support, and ultimately, by the end of this video, I hope I help you decide whether you should go for a UGREEN NAS or a Synology NAS. So let's crack on with that first one, shall we? Price. And unsurprisingly, when it comes to the entire range of Synology solutions, because this isn't just about these two units, we are talking about the entire gamut spectrum of the product portfolio of UGREEN and Synology. I'll say right now, Synology systems, by the by, are more expensive at every single tier. Whether it is you're going for the value series, you're going into your plus, you're going into your XS, your RS, whatever, Synologies are more expensive. That is generally because of the hardware-software balance that Synology has. Their software, and we'll get obviously onto that in more detail later on, but Synology's software is the premium. It is the big sell. It is their AAA reason people go for them. And unsurprisingly, it means that takes up a large percentage of the price point there. And when you go for a Synology solution, when you are laying down the money, you're spending a lot more on that software than you are on the hardware. But the software itself is absolutely killer, but we'll get onto that later. Now, with the UGREEN systems, we've got to look at this two different ways. Maybe you're one of those lucky few that, I say lucky, you just went ahead and went for a crowdfunding campaign and hope for the best. And that system, whether it's the 2, the 4, the 6, the 8, or the little flash system, insane how low price it was. And ultimately, the price during the crowdfunding was unbeatable. Industry-wide, there wasn't a single hardware NAS solution I could find or build that could rival the price point of those systems available across the entire gamut of the hardware configurations. Now, as we get closer to physical, actual, traditional retail release, things are going to be a little bit more blurry. They did state during the early campaign the RRP recommended retail price of each of their 2, 4, 6, 8 and little flash configurations there. But even then, their RRP pricing is still lower, hardware for hardware, scale for scale, than every other Synology solution out there. And also, you've got to add, there's absolutely no way that UGREEN are going to sell these devices at that RRP. They're just simply not. No one ever does. Whenever you see the RRPs from not just NAS servers, but any hardware, you generally find that the RRP only exists so they can make it look like a discount somewhere along the line. So even that RRP I do not maintain as a real price. Ultimately, you are getting better value hardware this side of the table and better software value for money on that side of the table. But we can't keep talking about hardware without going into a little bit more detail. And realistically, the hardware, you will be unsurprised here that internally, generally, the internal hardware is better on the UGREEN side. At the moment, across the gamut of their solutions, there's 3 different CPU configurations. There's an Intel N100 quad-core, there's an Intel Pentium 5-core, 12th generation, and a 12th generation i5 10-core system there, running with DDR5 memory, 8 gig to start with, can be scaled up to, I believe, even 64 gig of DDR5 memory, non-ECC, but it is on-die ECC DDR5, which isn't really the same thing, but we talked about it before. There's SD card slots built into it, into the front of it there. You've got USB Type-C, you've got Thunderbolt connections on some systems, you've got 2.5 GBE, 10 GBE on the majority of their systems, you've got HDMI out 2.0, so 60 frames per second 4K, and the general design, I would say UGREEN have been one of the few NASes that I would say have beaten Synology on the physical design. I really like this slightly Fallout-esque aesthetic across the gamut of their systems. Now, when it comes to the hardware on the Synology side, unsurprisingly, as I alluded to earlier on, their priority has always been the software and eking the very most out of efficient hardware. Now, with them, I would say the general range of CPUs, they've got more CPUs to offer, from ARM, Realtek to Intel Celeron to a point, to AMD Ryzen to Intel's Xeons to AMD EPYC. There is a huge arrangement of CPUs, a huge arrangement of DDR4, DDR5, ECC, genuine ECC memory systems there. Then you've got a lot of 10GBE systems rolling out the gate there. They've got 1GBE, they've got the upgrade cards there. The design, I would say, is more modest now compared to the UGREEN one. It's still very, very nice, and it's only really UGREEN, I think, may have challenged them on the design aesthetic, but they run slightly quieter as well, and ultimately can end up being a little bit more power efficient as well. Now, all of that aside, that hardware is definitely not going to excite you unless you spend serious money. You have to get into the $1,500 to $2,000 bracket before the hardware gets what I would argue to be interesting. But at the same time, I would argue things like Synology's PCIe upgrade cards for 10GBE, for M2 NVMe, cache card, combo cards as well. Then they've got their 25 gig Ethernet upgrade cards there. Then you have things like NAS expansions that allow you to bolt on storage organically to expand your storage area without changing all your shares and paths. The hardware, I'm not going to say it's exciting, but I will say it's more fully featured, and their catalogue for hardware is significantly more diverse. Not only the hardware upgrades and peripherals I just mentioned, but also the fact that they have got a 1, a 2, a 4 bay, a 5 bay, an 8 bay, a 12 bay, multiple rack mount configurations, and more. So although the hardware is definitely arguably more modern and exciting here within this framework, we have to give Synology the credit there that in terms of hardware, there is a more diverse portfolio they've established over 25 years, and there's a larger variety of hardware configurations to scale your budget accordingly. But let's talk software. And on to the software. On the left-hand side, we've got Synology's DSM. On the right-hand side, we've got UGREEN's UGOS software. Let's log into them both, and we'll make our way into the GUI experience of both. Now, keep in mind right now that I am, of course, looking at this with them split down the middle. Normally, you would utilize these in full screen, or you'd use the client apps. More on that later on. You can see a lot of similarities between the two. I'm not sure how I feel about UGREEN's kind of semi-Windows 11 wallpaper there. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but between the two of them, there's definitely a semblance of similarity between the two, at least in terms of initial looking at them here on the screen. But I would also add that one of the earliest representations of the history between Synology and, say, UGREEN and the NAS software is displayed in the apps and services that you get. So, for example, the App Center on both of them is incomparable. On the App Center on the UGREEN system, I will say they've added a lot more tools since my original UGOS NAS software video. They've added virtual machine tools now. They've added multimedia tools now. They've got the music application there. They've got NetDisk for cloud synchronization. More on that later on. They've got the new Video Center application, which can crawl and scrape metadata. There's a lot of stuff on there that wasn't there to start with. Even when you go as far as the client tools that you can download, they've now got more apps that you can download for your operating system, right the way down to Android TV and Apple TV. And when you move forward from that, there's the mobile application we talked about before. And indeed, they go into a lot more detail about the individual apps and services available in UGOS for you to, synchronize your data, for you to access it live, to access multimedia, to run VMs, backups, and more. There is a lot more to it than there was 2 months ago when I reviewed the software in its own software video. And of course, recently we've shown you how to install Plex via Docker, because you've got Docker on here as well. That said, it's still not a patch on the apps and services afforded to you by Synology. Synology's been in the game nearly 25 years, and with that there are a lot of applications and services that you simply don't get anywhere else. That extends not only to the apps and services such as Active Backup Suite, Synology Drive, and Modern Surveillance Station, to name but a few, but on top of that, when you head into the client center, things get even deeper with a huge arrangement of apps and services for Mac, for Windows, Linux systems and more to run and access the Synology in a native fashion. There is absolutely loads, and that extends all the way down, by the way, to mobile applications too, when there's absolutely loads. When UGREEN have only got the one at the moment. Yes, there is a sense of simplicity. Let's be honest, one app to rule them all. I don't want to get all Lord of the Rings on you, but some people want more tailored apps, and I think a lot of you are just going to prefer the software experience in terms of client apps on the Synology. Now, navigation and the user experience is pretty similar. When we go into the control panel of both of these, one can argue there have been homages. I think that might be a polite way to put it. The layout of the apps are pretty similar between them. There is an argument for, standard UX kind of layouts of apps and tools, but I would say between the two of them there are similarities. I will also add as well that we have needed to zoom in and out just a little bit there to make sure everything has parity there on screen. But as you can see, when we go to 80% zoom on the Synology and the UGREEN software side by side, things are pretty similar text size and more, but I think the apps do pop just a little bit more on the Synology. When we look at what you can do with the system, when it comes to controls, I think both of them are very similar indeed. I like the buzzer, fan, LED and memory compression controls here on the UGREEN software side. Although that is available on the Synology side, I actually quite like the simplified layer of these on the UGREEN side. However, network configuration, there's just a lot more options and configuration afforded to you on the Synology side, when on the UGREEN side it just feels a little bit more limited there. The options are present, but they're just not as diverse. And that extends, by the way, down to security, something we're going to have to talk about a lot more. I think the security protocols on the Synology are just better. There's a lot of crossover between the two, everything from DOS protection, auto lockout, firewall protection, installing certificates, all of that sort of stuff is there. But when it comes to security, Synology just got more layers afforded to you, notwithstanding the fact that if you want, you can enable two-step authentication, something that is still annoyingly not present on the UGREEN software. On top of that, when you move into the systems, you can't use encrypted volumes. You can't create write once, read many folders to provide protection from ransomware. These kind of security and redundancy and protective failure options, it's just a shame they're not present on the UGREEN system. I understand they're not going to be for everyone. They may feel ever so slightly enterprise, but the idea of utilising write once, read many protection or encrypting my volumes is an option I want, and just sadly, when we look at the UGREEN software and we create ourselves a random folder, we've got recycle bin, volume limitations of storage, and allowing access to certain users, but that's really it. There isn't an option for encrypted volumes or worm. Circling back to when I did my review of the UGS software when it was very much in beta, I will say another thing that's missing, or at least not provided in the way that I would like, is a security advisor. Now, there is a security manager on the UGREEN side. The security tool, what it allows you to do is scan the system and also protect you from viruses, protect you from malware, create security logs, quarantine, all that kind of stuff, all very, very useful stuff. However, in 2024, when you are running a NAS system, things like viruses and malware, although they're not impossible, you want to be protected from ransomware. And ransomware attacks a system when there are vulnerabilities and little holes where an injected code can be sent into your system. That code will then zip up, archive all of your data, delete the original data, leave a little ransom note that says pay us this money and we'll give you the key, and then they go away. They don't try to remove the data. They don't want to compromise the system, because then how will you pay them? And the security manager just lacks that. It doesn't have that on the UGREEN side. Malware and virus protection is great, and unsurprisingly, you can add those on the Synology side as well. They've got antivirus there from McAfee. They've got their own security scanner there built in. but I want both. And more importantly, I prefer to have ransomware protection. I want to have that security advisor scanning my system periodically, telling me that ports are open, telling me that passwords are weak, telling me that I've got to make changes, and also configuring those set on a baseline of my own choosing. I feel like I'm really ragging on the UGREEN system. In their defense, some elements of it are actually better than they are presented on the Synology. I like the task manager that runs in the background of the UGREEN system. I think it's a lot more detailed and gives me more per core information. On top of that, their integration of Docker, their integration of a virtual machine manager, although they seem a little bit bare bones, I will say they definitely do what I want them to do, and they're not overstuffed with features that I'm not going to be utilizing. They've just stripped it down to the bare bones, and at least they're utilizing their own first-party VM tool rather than utilizing a third-party one, which some other brands have done. Not Synology, they've got their own, and I get that. They're a big brand, they're a big, bold brand, and they've got a lot going for them. But even though they are making these changes and improvements to the software on the UGREEN side, everything from those multimedia tools that I mentioned earlier on that are periodically indexing your system, the Video Center application that's going to crawl and find more information about your media and allow you to stream effectively, DLNA, sync media tools for backup, they are all here. You've got the tools, but some of them do still need more time in the oven. You'll be trying to look at maybe synchronizing your NAS with the cloud, and then when you're going through the settings, it's not in the sync tools there. You have to go in to what's known as the, Realback? Where is it? I've gone blind. NetDisk tools, there it is. The NetDisk tools here allows you to create a new connection and synchronize with your Microsoft OneDrive, but that's it. And also, that's one way. So again, they've not got Google Drive. They're only supporting just the one cloud platform at the moment. And although you can use the backup synchronization tool that I just showed you to map against another third-party server, rsync support there is still not really firmly established. So, for example, let's go for a remote server. You can see remote UGREEN NAS still not supported, just traditional rsync file server. When we go into other options, some of it is still in progress. And, we didn't expect UGREEN software to be ready to go right out the gate. Unfortunately, we live in a DLC society, but the software could still do with a few more bells and whistles. Whereas the Synology side is so goddamn feature rich. I've already reviewed DSM multiple times in the past, and I'll link to it in the description, but again, everything from an iSCSI target and LUN manager there built in. If you want to go ahead with a surveillance platform, you've got a surveillance platform built into this system. If you want to go ahead with AI photography, something we'll talk about later on, they have recently updated their AI photo app. But again, we will talk more on that in just a moment. If you go back in, you've got Synology Drive for that cross-party synchronization tool that allows you to map using native apps for your Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, whatever systems, and synchronize a shared team folder on the NAS and never have to log into the NAS. Just run the whole thing via that application and your native file manager tools. There's just a lot more going on here on the Synology side. And again, 25 years. Of course there's going to be more going on, but it's just right now, if you want a feature-rich experience between UGREEN and Synology NAS, there's going to be more apps here. But before we end the software section, it is worth highlighting that with Synology software, they have come under a lot of criticism over being somewhat limited, somewhat proprietary to a point. For example, a lot of the hard drives that you want to utilize inside your Synology NAS system, Synology has been clamping down quite significantly on the compatibility of storage on their systems. Certain drives, really obvious drives I would add, are not supported. If you go to the compatibility lists of the majority of Synology NASs at the moment, a lot of the obvious hard drives, and particularly any drive above about 18 TB, is not available for compatibility there. And on the UGREEN, you've got support of all of those. If you want to use the M.2 NVMe slot on some Synology NASs, only a handful of them allow M.2 NVMe storage pools, whereas on the UGREEN side, all of them support SSD caching on those bays and SSD storage pools, just caching on the majority of Synology NAS systems. When we look at the photo tool, I said we'd come back to it. On the Synology Photo side, Synology Photos, the application, allows you to use thing recognition to a point and facial recognition. But when you use Synology Photos versus that of, say, the AI-powered tools in UGREEN's photo app here, although it's a little bit more the Wild West to a point, I will say, for example, the AI settings, they have person recognition, they have deduplication built in, they have scene and object recognition, they've got automatic recognition of potentially sensitive content material, recognition, pet recognition, image recognition. There's just a lot more options at your disposal. You know, an OCR reading, model training, like the photo recognition on the UGREEN side is significantly more detailed. Again, the Synology side gives you more. There is no denying that. But the UGREEN side does seem to give you a lot more customization, management and control and configuration at your fingertips that's not afforded to you on the Synology side. Now, closing out, I think we can all agree that the Synology software is better. It's the better software, it's the better apps, the better client tools, and I would argue probably the more overall pleasing user experience. The UGREEN side of things still has a way to go. They've added a lot of the features people want, from BTRFS to virtual machines and Dockers, from a lot of the in-progress synchronization and backup tools, but still lacking things like write once, read many, lacking things like volume encryption, lacking things like a comprehensive security manager checking ports, logs, comparing information in the background, and finding out when your system may be compromised. There is a log center. But I will say the UGREEN side definitely is a plucky little upstart and a disruptor in the NAS world. And moreover, in terms of software, let's not overlook the fact that on the UGREEN NAS side, even if you don't want to use their software, you can install TrueNAS. You can install Unraid. They've got guides to help you do it, and it will allow you to do that and still keep your hardware warranty. So even if the UGREEN software doesn't fully float your boat, keep in mind that it's not the end of the road for you in terms of software, and that's something Synology will not offer you. Overall, of course, the Synology is the better software, but I would argue the UGREEN is the more adaptable software, at least at this time.
Help, I need somebody help, not just anybody.
Warranty and support. Let's be realistic about this. When it comes to both of these brands, we can have a very different tale to tell. The Taiwanese-based company Synology and the China-based company UGREEN have launched their products in a very different fashion. Synology, again, 25 years in the biz. They've got multiple locations all the way around the world. On top of that, they have got standard 2 to 3 year warranties on the majority of their solutions that can be expanded up to 5 years. Indeed, a number of their enterprise solutions arrive with 5 years by default. They've got a larger history of reviews and customer interactions and case studies and more. And ultimately, there is more evidence on the field about their support, their regional support, regional availability, and more. Now, UGREEN, although UGREEN have been around, I think, for 12 to 14 years, and they are within their own respect, and a very large company, arguably bigger than a lot of the NAS companies I've talked about, in the spectrum of NAS, it's a very different story. This is their first kind of series being launched. They're technically not their first, but the other one was very much limited to the East. And I don't feel they've got the same locational coverage for their NAS solutions as they do for the rest of their accessories and peripherals. Now, to their credit, we could look at that crowdfunding. They had I think 6,000, it might be more than that, 6,000 backers or whatever. And you can just read all the comments. There's nothing stopping people who are unhappy, that have had a bad experience, putting stories there. And it's early days right now, but as people are receiving their units, I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of negativity. I'm not, there is the odd query and concern, but we have to also factor in that there is going to be percentage rates for failure on any single brand. The other thing I will highlight with crowdfunding and the Kickstarter there is UGREEN could have just half-assed this. They could have bunged this on their Kickstarter, done sweet FA, collected the millions that came from it, and pushed out an older style project on a budget. But they are continuing to upgrade that software. I'm seeing a software roadmap. They are still working on it. They are adding features. That doesn't necessarily translate into long-term support and more, but I will say, when we are looking at the relative adolescence of their NAS systems, they are at least showing willing there. But ultimately, right now, if warranty and support is absolutely do or die for you, unsurprisingly, the 25-year NAS veteran over here is going to be the one for you. But if you're not that fussed about that, and definitely if you're going to go down that road with a third-party OS, then certainly this one in terms of support has your back. And that's really it. Let's face it, we went into this knowing that the hardware was going to seemingly be a bit better here and the software was going to be seemingly better here. But there is more to it than that. There is a better diversity of hardware on the Synology side of things that if you really want to customize and think about what you want, you might really enjoy. Plus, their software is more fully featured. I hate seagulls. It has more apps and client tools available to it, and it's a far more regulated platform, and we'll get onto that in a second. Whereas the UGREEN side of things, it has to be said that the ability to support third-party operating systems, check for a lot of users. The hardware is just so much beefier, and for those that are prepared to put the extra bit of time in with their OS, or wait until the OS evolves even more, this is still going to make a fantastic choice. And don't forget those connections and ports. 10GBE, Thunderbolt connectivity there, SD card readers. These are all things that you have to either spend premium on the Synology platform, or you're not going to get at all. Ultimately, UGREEN hardware stands on its own very well, but the software still has to catch up, whereas Synology prioritising that software has certainly ruffled some feathers. And when it comes to things like their hardware compatibility question marks regarding hard drives there, and some of their promotion and changing focus of the brand ever so slightly more towards the enterprise, I think there are those that are going to have pause for thought on this. But don't overlook that the UGREEN system is still not finished. The hardware it's fantastic, but the software isn't finished yet. And I think a number of you that are not in a mad rush to choose a NAS right now would certainly do well to bear that in mind. But this has been UGREEN versus Synology for your NAS. I hope you've enjoyed this. There should be a written article linked below. If not live now, then very soon. These things take time to write, you know. I will see you on the next video. If you are looking at buying a Synology or UGREEN NAS and you were going to go to one of the retailers listed in the description below, please use those links. It really helps us out here on the channel. It costs you nothing extra and it helps us carry on doing what we do. I'll also link to numerous reviews on UGREEN and Synology NAS systems below. But apart from that, have yourselves a fantastic week.